Welcome to the Coming Home Well podcast, the show that educates, supports, and advocates for the veteran community. Your host, Dr. Tyler Pieron, U.S. Army retired, will bring you exciting conversations with amazing guests about resources, research, and military history, all geared to helping our warriors to come home well. Here's your host, Dr. Tyler Pieron.
Welcome back to Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Tyler Pieron, and today we're going to do some history. I love history. Anybody who listens to the show knows I have a lot of authors and podcasters and other folks on to talk about history. And today we have somebody who is going to help us learn a little bit about the history of warfare in the Pacific Theater during World War II. I'm a huge fan of history, but I'm also a huge fan of military history, and this is what we're going to focus on today. We have Jenny Chan, who is at the Pacific Atrocities Education, where she and her colleagues work to uncover and share the forgotten stories from the Pacific Asia theater of World War II, especially those that don't really make the headlines. She has personally scanned over 1 million pages from the National Archives and has written several books focusing on untold wartime experiences. And some of these you might have heard about, but some of them you might not have. The Chinese Comfort Women, the realities of Unit 731. And if you haven't heard of Unit 731, you're going to be shocked. As well as things like the occupation of Hong Kong. Now, these efforts are aimed to help the survivors find closure with their past and enable a broader conversation about human rights. Jenny also has a podcast where she has some fantastic guests, such as James Bradley. And they have a really good audience, about 34,000 history enthusiasts. So I will put the link to her show in the show notes so you don't have to write it down while we're talking. But thank you so much for joining us, Jenny. I'm really interested in what you at the Pacific Atrocities Education Group do.
Yeah, thank you for having me. We like you have summarized it pretty well. We digitize a lot of the primary documents relating to World War II in the Pacific. And I started this when my grandma passed away. When my grandma was still alive, she would often tell me to stop reading manga, to stop watching anime. These Japanese people are evil. You need to stop doing that. And I just thought that she was being racist. I didn't realize that she probably had PTSD from the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong. Until when she passed away, we found like this box of military yen and rice rationing coupons. And it was very eye-opening because she had told me in passing, and I wasn't really listening, that her family had to trade in a lot of their money for these Japanese yen, which by the end of the war, it was next to nothing. It was worth nothing, actually. It was toilet paper worth more than that by the end of the war. And so then I thought there must be some truth to it. And I was not able to find too much literature in terms of the war in English. And so then I started looking through, and The Rape of Nanking was a very popular book by Iris Chang. And so I thought, wow, there's a lot more to be researched. If there's only 1 or 2 books in The Rising Sun by John Toland, I don't know if you've read that.
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah, it's like a 2-volume book by John Toland. He was able to because his wife was Japanese, so he was able to interview a lot of these politicians in general right after the war.
Oh,
So it
wow.
was really eye-opening. And and it was also around the time that they were declassifying a ton of material at the National Archives relating to the Japanese war crimes. So I thought, well, I wonder if there's a nonprofit that does this kind of work. And I was disappointed. I couldn't find a nonprofit that really, interview and digitize or take a look or research more into the Pacific War. So then I started the nonprofit like 10 years ago. And yeah, now we have digitized about 1 million pages about World War II in the Pacific. And what I have found in these research and during this research is that it was a horrific time in human history. I mean, some of these brutalities, I just cannot believe. For example, I think I was just telling you that if you were a U.S. soldier and you were captured by the Nazis, there's like a 1% of mortality rate versus if a POW was captured by if a soldier was captured by the Japanese and was spending his time at the POW camp in Japan, it will be like a 35 to 40% mortality rate.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, we picture the Nazis as evil personified. Like,
Right,
if someone's a Nazi, they're just as evil as they come. Yet the POWs that were in their custody, it's like a 1%. I mean, so clearly they're feeding them and making sure that they don't die.
right,
Whereas under the Japanese, it's 40 times that. That is
right. And
crazy.
and it's so mind-blowing because the first time I realized like, wow, the Americans are really dying in the hands of the Japanese, it was when I was scanning this diary by Robert Peaty. Robert was a British soldier who was captured in the Mukden camp,
Hmm.
Hokten, which is current day Shenyang, but he was like in the propaganda camp. And in his diary, every single day, he was like, oh, an American soldier died today. An American soldier died today. And then like maybe like once a month, a UK soldier, a British soldier would die. But then every single day, he was either writing five American soldiers died today, or like there's at least one death. And I was
Hmm.
just thinking like, wow, this is crazy times. And also on top of that, they were doing harsh labor. Mukden is like near Russia, so it was like super cold. And they were assembling Mitsubishi Zero fighters plane because by that time of war, every Japanese soldier was at war. I mean, every Japanese man was at war, so then they needed labor to
Hmm.
assemble planes and whatnot. And so then they would capture these Americans, for example, from Bataan Death March, put them on hell ship, and then ship them to wherever the Japanese Empire was. And have them do slave labor. I'm pretty sure you've watched like River Kwai.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the Bridge across River Kwai.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's
It's one of the
so
few. I mean, there's some movies, but it's not really captured the width and breadth of how horrible the Japanese theater or the Pacific theater was compared to Europe. Maybe it's
right.
the language, maybe it's the close ties with the countries after the war. Whereas in Japan, it was horrible.
Now you nailed it actually a lot. The guy, the architect of the economic policy of Manchuria, which is a Japanese occupied China, Kishi Nobusuke, he actually became prime minister
Mm.
after the war, and he was basically taken out of the Sugamo prison by Eisenhower. But as you have politics going on, you have the language barrier going on, and there was just a lot going on, and
Hmm.
I think that it's hard for people to believe that it even happened. And I do a like twice a month podcast with James Bradley on Pacific Front Untold. And he was telling me that his father came back from the war and didn't want to talk about it. Whenever, like, even if John Wayne called, he was told to tell John Wayne, oh, my father's out at a fishing trip.
Yeah,
He's not
not
here
available.
right now, not available. And I think you were telling me that your grandpa also
Yeah, he
fought.
was he was drafted. He was a U.S. citizen, born in the U.S., but his parents were Polish citizens, had gone back to Poland, and then right around 1938, right before the Nazis rolled into Poland, they saw some things happening, and because he's a U.S. citizen, they said, "Hey, John, why don't you go to the U.S.?" He had two, a brother and a sister that couldn't go because they weren't born in the U.S., and so he got sent to the States all alone, at 17 years old, and then the next year he gets drafted. Or a year and a half. But yeah, so he's drafted and barely speaks any English and is learning English, but even though he's a U.S. citizen, and then immediately is sent to the Pacific Theater and he spent 4+ years, in combat and number of campaigns, and he would not talk about it. In fact, I spent every summer with him and my grandmother till I was like 12 or 13 or something like that. But every summer we would spend, with them, and I would sometimes sleep in the same room. It was a smaller cottage where we would go for the summer, and he would wake up with night terrors. And I thought, oh, well, old people have night terrors. Okay. I didn't realize until many years later when I was a soldier that, oh, Grandpa most likely had like severe PTSD. And, that's where he would have these nightmares. He was a kind older man, just very, very clever, but definitely had PTSD. And I was like
Wow.
sort of fascinated, but it wasn't until years and years later that I even knew that he served in the Pacific Theater. He wouldn't even talk about it.
And also, I think a lot of the soldiers come back and their families didn't know what PTSD was.
No, it didn't exist at the time. It was shell shock and it was something to be ashamed of.
Right. And so, yeah, so he probably couldn't even get help even if he wanted to.
Yeah,
And he's considered to be the lucky ones who come back from the
yeah,
Pacific War. I mean, in Iwo Jima, it's brutal. I was reading about Guadalcanal. If a soldier is down by the Japanese, then another soldier would have to go back to the gun and like just replace. It was just like a human assembly line.
yeah.
A-
So
And,
I'm really curious. How in the world, when you have millions and millions and millions of pages of things to look for in the National Archives, how do you decide what is it you're going to scan that you're going to, add to the internet accessible world
yes,
of
so
research?
I started out with Unit 731 because I was going into the literature rabbit hole and I read The Death Factory by Sheldon Harris. Have you heard of this book?
Yes.
Okay, so have you read it?
I read it years ago,
Okay,
but I don't
did you
remember all
read
the
version
details.
edition one or two?
Probably edition one. It was years ago. I
So
have it on my
edition
shelf
one,
because I remember looking at what do I have on World War II Pacific, and it's a much smaller section. And I'm looking at it right now. I have shelves behind in front of me, and it's a much smaller section. It probably sort of my own interest, but in the last 5, 10 years, when I've been researching over my grandfather, I started adding more of my history books for World War II in the Pacific Theater, just simply trying to understand what he went through and what unit was he in and what did they do and all these things that have a personal interest to me. But I
yeah.
remember reading about Unit 731. Fortunately, he wasn't involved with that at all. But
Yeah,
uh,
so at the first edition and the second edition are totally different. If you look into first edition, and he did it at a time when there was not that much declassification. So then my personal question was that why is it that in the first edition he mentioned about the US soldiers being human experimented on, but
right.
then on the second edition he kind of took that whole part out. And so I thought, interesting. So when they declassified everything related to Unit 731, I went and took a look and I thought, wow, maybe there's some truth to first edition. And then I realized that like there was a whole Congress meeting after he wrote his book and they told him to remove that part because it's not verified. And
Oh,
so then I was like, well, I wonder if there's actually some truth to it. And so then I continue going on to this rabbit hole. And then I don't know if you heard of this book called Unjust Enrichment. It's like
no.
I'm just halfway through it. And I also, so anyway, long story short, and then I moved on from Unit 731 to Hookton because I realized that Hookton was very close to Unit 731, where Unit 731 was doing human experimentation. So I thought if they were doing like human experimentation on American soldiers, the most logical area would be Hookton. So I requested all of the primary sources related to that camp because I was thinking, okay, there must be some evidence. And I
Hmm.
realized that um, he was right in his first edition. The death
Ah, but he
at the
bent
death
to the
factory.
political winds to take it out.
Right. And
Boy,
so and so I was like, wow, this is and so then that sent me down the whole rabbit hole. So then I archived the whole thing about Hookton and whatnot and sent it into the digital world. And then I started reading Unjust Enrichment, and I realized that Linda Holmes had come to the same conclusion that Hookton was they did do human experimentation on American soldiers.
hmm
And then after that, I went into like a whole rabbit hole because in Hookton, as I mentioned before, American soldiers were dying off like way faster than like other soldiers. So then I
right.
went down a rabbit hole of like where they all came from. And so then that sent me down to like Bataan Death March and also Hell Ships. And so then I started digitizing those. And so like and then while I was going through these boxes and these folders, I uncover like other items, for example, and I realized that they're all related. And I got to the and I got to like this thing where they were talking about like the Zaibatsu, who were the companies who benefited from all of these like POW and also the Occupy Manchuria and the Japanese Empire. And so then I started digitizing that. So
What a
then,
process as you personally like, hey, I want to read about this and learn about what it was the truth. And then you follow it up and you follow it up and you follow it up. And is that how you select what to archive and what to digitize?
yes and no. Sometimes when I see like a series of items that are like super fragile and
Hmm.
like is because during the Civil War, even during the Civil War, they were using cotton-based paper. Now,
Yeah.
but during World War II, it's all onion skin peel paper.
Yeah.
So it's really like fragile. And so
It's
then
like
if I
tissue paper that's degrading.
Right. And so if
Yeah.
I stumble across a box that the National Archive has no interest in scanning in the next 10 years and is already degraded, then I kind of just go into the whole series and just scan it.
Makes sense. Yeah, get it before it goes away.
Yeah, exactly. You have to because it's just, I mean, there's just no priority to scanning about
Yeah.
the Pacific War. Like you said, there's language barrier, there's also political agenda. And I want to go back to about talking about the house ships because it's very interesting. And
So
by
the
this
house
point,
ships are the ways that they move people around.
yes.
Okay.
And yeah, and by this point, you can kind of realize that the Japanese had no regard of like the Geneva Convention. And so the whole war, I mean, for Unit 731, for example, right, they were doing human experimentation. And I realized that it's because the guy who started the lab realized that they can harness like germs and develop all these biological weapons.
Hmm.
And I realized that the Japanese signed the Geneva Convention but never ratified it.
Ah.
And so then that's why they did not care what they were doing during the war because for them, they don't really acknowledge that they signed it. And so,
Like, yeah, we did the Geneva Convention, so we just as long as you only do it for us and not us for you.
right. And then it's interesting because the guy who started the Unit 731, he read the Geneva Convention and he was like, well, if there's a whole chapter on germs, we have to harness this kind of like power. And so then he started.
He took the Geneva Conventions as a way to do some things that you're not allowed to do as sort of
Right.
a starting point wish list.
Right, exactly.
Isn't that
And
insane? Like,
it
so
it is.
we've talked, I've heard ever since I was a kid about Dr. Engel and the Nazis and their horrible experiments and all the horrible things. But I would imagine for every person that's heard about, Dr. Engels and all the other horrible Nazis, they've never heard of Unit 731 or the Japanese experimentation
Ishishiro.
on humans.
Right. And the Japanese equivalent of this Joseph Mengele would just be Ishishiro. And um and he was doing human experimentation on people to come up with biological germs weapons.
Uh-huh.
And what's really fascinating about this guy is that he's obviously smart, and then he got a ton of funding from the emperor because during the Russo-Japanese War, a lot of Japanese soldiers had water problem, and so then he peed into his water. He made this water filter, and then in order to get funding, he peed into the water filter, drank that filter pee in front of the emperor, and that's how the emperor was so impressed that that he gave him funding
Ah,
because the emperor was also like a hobbyist biologist.
mm,
But the interesting, and so anyway, I wanted to go to and talk about hellship because that's how like a lot of the POWs were perishing a lot faster than like their counter. So after Bataan Death March, which I'm pretty sure is your audience have heard of, were sent to Camp Odano, and then they were packed onto hell ships where they were not marked. The ships that were transporting them were not marked because by this point we know that the Japanese never ratified the Geneva Convention. So they
right.
didn't care about marking the ship. And so then a lot of the ships were sunk by friendly fire.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, and I recently read something about how this one guy sank this whole hell ship, and he was an American, so it was like an American versus Ally hell ship, and he had like PTSD, and he felt so apologetic afterward because when he sunk the hell ship, apparently the Japanese soldiers even like sent a few soldier suicidal they're going to go down with the ship and also shoot down whoever is going to try to escape because they
Hmm.
don't want to take prisoners, and then they try to log everyone below deck so then they sink with the ship, and then whoever was trying to escape from these hell ships during their time of sinking
Hmm.
would also be gunned down by the Japanese officers who chose to
Wow.
stay in the ship and commit suicide and go down with the ship. And so it was just so interesting to see like this whole it's like a three-part tragedy.
Yeah. First you get captured, then you put on a house ship. The
And then you
Allies shoot, and disable, and sink the house ship, and then even though it's sinking, they won't even let them escape
right.
for the sinking. I mean, that's just crazy.
Right. And so when I was reading about this, it's just so fascinating because we have always heard about like other ships, um, you know, in World War II, but like we never really hear about hell ships. And you were just telling me about Syria, where they were struck by friendly fire.
Yep.
Yeah,
Or they you think it's friendly, and then turns out that they're really part of the bad guys. And it was a common problem in Afghanistan and Iraq. People would come as local interpreters or guides or something, and then get the trust and be able to do something, and then do a suicide attack or something.
mm,
And the inability to identify who the enemy is, which has been really the problem for Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, any of these insurgencies. They're not wearing uniforms. At least the Japanese were, for the most part, almost always wearing their uniform. You could tell what country they were from. Whereas these folks are just, oh, I'm a citizen. I'm not any bad guy. And then it turns out that they are the bad guys.
wow.
Whereas, uniforms, at least the Japanese were wearing uniforms. They were doing all sorts of horrible, horrible war crimes. But at the same time, you knew who the enemy was.
Right.
You might
And
be terrified, and rightfully so, of getting captured because of that, but at the same time, you knew it was the enemy.
right. Actually, that's not fully true because some of the Japanese were actually Kempeitai who were basically spying and trying to scout out what's happening
Yep.
before they do an attack. Which I
And
thought
that's why I said for the most part, because yeah, I was familiar with that. They're spies, and we're just citizen. I'm a farmer,
yeah,
counting the
and
tanks and counting the troops and reporting
right.
it.
And it's so interesting to me too that you fought in Iraq, right?
And Afghanistan.
Oh wow. So how was that experience like for you?
It was a totally different experience. I mean, it really depends. The experience of one person in Iraq or Afghanistan can be entirely different than somebody on the same base, just simply because of the work that you're doing or the type of job that you have. So it's a different environment, and that's what I always say. It's so different from any other war that we've ever fought because it's not like a clear war with a defined front and armies attacking. It's more like a police action where you're targeting and trying to identify bad guys and then doing very surgical attacks or capture missions or kill missions to get those specific people. One of the things I was doing was trying to identify who the bomb makers were from their biometrics, their DNA, their fingerprints, and then trying to track who those people actually are in reality on the ground. Uh, eye scans don't leave evidence, but it allows you to identify, hey, we've seen that guy before, and they match these fingerprints, and these fingerprints were found on a bomb. So
Wow.
it's a whole process now, but greatly changed the nature of the anonymity of IED makers, but that has changed warfare so significantly. The IEDs, the improvised explosive devices, very much the same way the drones have now changed Ukraine and any future conflict. So
Yeah.
it's rapidly evolving. But World War II is very much that way. There was never been, we had World War One, which is very static, mostly in Europe. And all of a sudden we have a true world war in World War II with the Pacific and the European theater, and much more dynamic, much more force on force. And people were like learning as they go. You went from a
Yeah.
peacetime army of, a couple 100,000 to almost 5 million men in uniform on the US alone. And
Right.
so,
It was
yeah, the
a
scale of
total
loss
war.
and the scale of fighting was just so dramatically different that a lot of people, their biggest danger in Iraq or Afghanistan was breaking a nail, or the coffee shop would run out of their favorite macalote latte, whatever, pumpkin spice in October, or whatever that was. Not to downgrade their service, but it's definitely a different environment where other people were living very much like combat troops would have lived in World War II.
Yeah.
Limited supplies, out by themselves, lots of harassing and attacks and things like that. So that's why I said my experience and others people's experiences are going to be so radically different. It's hard to generalize.
Yeah.
But everybody's job is super important. Even the people who do the laundry or do sewing or the mess hall, the people making the food. And that's one of the
Mhm.
things that I always try, like, hey, we need everybody in order to go fight. And that's where it
Yeah.
really counts. So I want to talk about Unit 731 just real quick because I don't think my audience is really familiar with them. And we know they did human experimentation, but like, what are we talking about? What does that mean?
Um, that means that whoever that they capture, they would vivisect them. Once actually recently, I started looking into like the Yokohama trial, which wasn't vastly available until like the 1970s, and it was very fascinating. And this is another reason why the part one, I mean, edition one of the death factor was actually correct. So by May 1945, as you know, um, the B-29 was bombing the Japanese mainland, and this bomber unit got captured by five of them, I think, got captured by the Japanese. Like the villagers turned them in, and then and then they were captured near Tokyo, and then they were brought to Kyushu Imperial College, and they were vivisected in front of a group of students for college lecture. And vivisected, for those who don't know, is being dissected alive. And so, and these are like villagers and students. They aren't exactly soldiers that
Hmm.
captured the other soldiers. And so it just shows that like how fanatic that country and that society had become at that time. And so for one of the experience, so this is not even at Unit 731. This was at Japan mainland. So that
Just a
led me to,
random village.
right. And so then this led me to believe that it was not just Unit 731. They had a whole network of people who were doing that. And
Hmm.
I'm going to get to that later. And so one of the experiment was that they took out a bomber's like a pilot's lungs and try to see how long the guy would last without his lungs, and like also do pumping out his blood to see like if they can replace with saline and whatnot.
Hmm.
And this is at random Kyushu Imperial University. So I'm pretty
So this
and
isn't even like the very condoned, medical research. Hey, we're going to come up with another way to kill the enemy. It's horrible,
right,
but hey, we're doing it. This is
right.
just random medical school. Hey, let's see how long you can live without lungs.
Exactly. And it's so fascinating because when you're thinking about a doctor, I'm pretty sure when the pilots were like rescued and like pushed into the surgery table and whatnot, he is thinking that he's going to get rescued. He's
Hmm.
thinking that he's going to be saved. Like when you and I see a doctor, we're like, oh my gosh, we're going to get saved. But
Yeah,
these
do no
people were,
harm, right?
right,
That's
exactly.
the universal
And
oath.
and these and so and this is 1945, but let's go back to like 1938 when Unit 731 was established in Manchuria. And even before that, it was actually established in Tokyo. But then Ishishiro, who was the founder of Unit 731, thought that, okay, if I do this in Japan, it is way too high profile. Everyone's going to know what I'm doing. And then
Hmm.
eventually someone's going to be connected better than I am and turn me in. So then when Japan occupied China, he thought, wow, this is a great opportunity for me to do my lab somewhere else. So he occupied a soy sauce factory. But then the some prisoners got out one day, and then he thought, well, even the factory is not big enough for me because people can still get out. And so what he did is that in order for secrecy to happen at a better rate, I need to actually have my own village. So he captured a village and displaced all the villagers there in Manchuria. Like the next like city is like Harbin. So if you go to like the Unit 731 museum, it's like you have to go and you can see that it's a very remote place. And he had a train, he had a to ship his maruta, we called it like the logs. So like his human
Oh,
experimentation
wow, the
like
people were the
victims there.
logs.
Right. And to ship his human experimentation like subjects there. And so then the train goes into the tunnel, and then he had his brother installed as as the prison guard. And what's more interesting about this Unit 731 is that he was also um, testing biological weapons because he had read in Geneva Convention that it's such a it's very powerful. So he was developing ceramic bomb with like flea bomb. So
Wow.
then since he had his own village, he was able to also acquire land where he had a testing field, and he had his own jet where he was drop the ceramic bomb onto these victims that were tied to stakes. And it was just a horrible like I mean, it's insane if you
It
think about the
defies the
scale of things.
imagination almost.
Right. And he also incentivized because other villagers to help him pick up like rats so then he can like to breed rats so then he can breed fleas into these flea bombs to spread diseases during like total warfare. And one of the biological weapons that he also produced was like these glanders and anthrax, powdered anthrax. So one of his scientists named Naito figured out how to make anthrax into powder. And so then they did that. And it's also like very interesting like at like the scale of how they do this because since he took over a village, he was able to build his own movie theater. He can build a dorm for his workers. He can build his own like huge lab. And it's just so much evil that went on with that. And for example, one of everyone knows about Pearl Harbor. And right after Pearl Harbor, FDR sent the Doolittle raid from Alameda from the USS Hornet, and they flew to Tokyo to capture, to bomb the mainland to boost morale.
Yep.
And
It's very famously in the
yes,
military.
yes. And but then it's because they're going to run out of fuel, so then it's kind of a one-way ticket unless you land like somewhere else. I think some of the Doolittle raiders ended up in Russia and it became like po political prisoners for a
Hmm.
while, and but then some landed in China. And the fascinating thing in when they landed in China and then they landed basically in the middle of nowhere, and then there were these villagers who saved them, and you can like see pictures of that on like I think I found a article about that on Smithsonian's website. And then right after that, Unit 731 conducted a biological attack onto the this village who saved the Doolittle pilots.
Hmm.
Um, and some of these people were living with rotten legs until with glanders and anthrax until like 2014 did they figure out how to like skin graft.
Oh,
So these
wow.
people like they were trying to work on their land, and then every single time they were working on their land, they would have like these rotten legs, like the skin will start rotting because of glanders and anthrax. And they didn't know what it was. It's not like with biological weapon. It's not like you can just pour bleach on it and then it's
Right.
going to get clean.
And it kept infecting people for decades?
Yes, the soil was so infected that these people were actually infected for decades, and they tried to sue them in like Tokyo court, and Tokyo courts admitted that Unit 73 happened, but then said that there's not enough evidence to pay reparation. Like they could
Yeah,
have
sure.
contracted from someone else who contracted that, but it's just a very like it's just with biological weapons, you never know what the
Yeah.
consequence is going to be. And which is like something that I have always in my mind, like, okay, so the Japanese wanted to capture this land to use it for themselves. But then if that's going to be the case, then they're going to live on some poisoned land themselves.
Yeah, maybe
Well,
they
what
didn't think that far, didn't know that part at the time, but gosh, that so we've talked about Unit 731, we talked about the ships. What is the scale of this research? This, the Unit 731, is it 1,000 people? Is it tens of thousands? Like, how many people suffered as a result of the research or with direct research, I should say, as opposed to the
human
secondary effects?
experimentation,
Yeah.
we never really know the number, right? Because the way that once the Soviet came to Manchuria and like tried to confiscate this lab, they pressed a button, they bombed the whole thing, they destroyed all the evidence. And also with these logs, the victims that they call logs, they start from like 0 to 1,000, and then they start again the count from 0 to 1,000. So it's at least thousands of people who were
They
human
probably were had
experiment.
tons of Chinese victims as well.
Right, and the Russians, because the
Yeah.
Russians are border is right there, and also a ton of Korean as well, because the Korean border is also over there. And Korea was under occupation of the Japanese for like decades before World War II.
A lot of
And
people don't realize why there's so much malevolence between the Chinese and the Koreans and the Japanese and the level and scope. I mean, a lot of people probably never realized that Korea was under occupation from Japan, that China, parts of China were under occupation.
right.
The Japanese were very imperial and just taking land all over the place. A lot of people
And
probably don't realize that.
one funny story when I was like stumbling across like my research when into the Philippines and whatnot, the Filipinos at first were like, "Oh my gosh, finally, maybe we're going to be liberated by the Japanese because we don't like the Americans too much." But then by the time the Japanese arrived, they were so brutal that the Filipinos ended up fighting with the Americans to
Yeah,
get
they're
the
like, hey, hey,
Japanese
hey, yeah,
out.
never mind. We're on your side.
We're back on your side now. It's okay.
It
Let's
is
fight.
amazing with the rapid changes in alliances, but also the brutality of the war. It's
Right.
not just the fighting, but it was the subjugation of the people and it was very, very brutal. I mean, the Nazis were very brutal, but we've seen a million movies and books and history and all these things. And, millions of people died in Europe, and there was an intentional targeting of various groups, including the Jews and the Gypsies and the disabled and Seventh-day Adventists and all these people that the Germans didn't like. But the Japanese were just like wholesale slaughter. Like, oh, you're not Japanese. Okay, we're just gonna kill all y'all.
Right. Exactly.
And
And
I don't know if one makes it more evil or the other, but both are pretty
and
evil in my
also
book.
in the rape of Nanking, the Nanjing massacre in 1937, the card carrying Nazi was surprised by the Japanese brutality. He then had his whole Nazi flag. He wrote to like his Nazi friends back home saying like, "Oh, our Japanese friends are like very brutal." And then he covered his whole building with a Nazi flag, saying that, "Oh, these people are under Nazi flags now. Please don't kill them." And like he was able to save
The
every
irony of that is just it's laughable, but gosh, you wouldn't think that,
right.
it's beyond the pale of just how violent, but it's really emblematic. And that's one of the reasons I love having you on to talk about this is people really don't understand how violent it was and just so indiscriminate the violence was. And
Mhm.
that's one of the things that we see in Iraq and Afghanistan is we'd have attacks on the U.S. troops, which you can understand in a way. Like, hey, I'm a foreigner. I'm in your country. I'm serving in the military. They're sending in mortars or targeting with IEDs. Yeah, in one sense, you can understand it. Like, hey, yeah, they're attacking the enemy troops. Okay, I get that. If somebody was
Right.
in the United States, we'd probably all be making IEDs and attacking them ourselves. But
Hmm.
one of the things I never understood was the violence against the other groups in these countries. Uh, Wholesale slaughter in the markets, or using disabled children to set off a suicide vest, or their own children in many cases. Just that level of hate and just it made no sense to me. Where, yeah, okay, you're attacking U.S. troops, got it. Yeah, okay, I get that. Disagree and want to apply some violence to make sure you don't be able to do that again. But doing it to your own people, especially civilians, that it just made no sense to me. And I think that was
And
one of the
I think
hardest.
a lot of people don't understand that at a war. Like this is not like what you see in the movie that like, oh, it's a battlefield. It's all like, people in like nice uniforms and like for example, like the rape of Nanking, they destroyed the whole city, right?
Yeah.
And like these are like people's homes that they were going into. And like it's like the local market, like you said, which is and so then it affects people's livelihood. It like
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
It wasn't just, hey, we're going to defeat the military. It's we're going to defeat the people and make sure they can't eat and food and have nothing and break their
Yeah.
will, but also just kill people to kill people.
Right. I mean, that's how like I realized that like that's how the Filipinos got radicalized
Oh,
and
yeah.
decided to like resist even after MacArthur was gone. They resisted for like 2 years and then by themselves with like no weapons
Yeah.
because just because of the Japanese brutality, they had like no supply, they barely were hanging on and they did it. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah, that was a straight up insurgency, which is, as the even the Japanese learned, it's very difficult to stamp out an insurgency.
Right.
We should have learned that lesson ourselves, I think, a few times. So let me ask you this. As you do this research, as you have spent, what, 10 plus years looking at the abject evil of the brutality and the violence and the murder, how could you look at that today and say, okay, how do our service members that are coming home understand the resiliency and sort of the legacy of trauma that we've learned so much about over the years? We've got a much better understanding of it now, but sort of take these lessons forward. to
I think what
today.
you guys do is pretty good. I see that you guys do have like alternative, um, you know, alternative help from just um other from just therapy, but also like people need to, like your grandpa. I think some people need to talk about it. It's not, for example, when I was talking to like these Chinese comfort women who were like captured as sex slaves for like decades, they didn't have a chance to talk about it. And it's not like until they were like very old and they're about to die that they talked about it. And so I think that what you guys offer is very good, that you have like a community basically where they talk about it and you guys provide help. What other options do you think is out there?
There are so many options for PTSD now. It's quite amazing. Our Veterans Affairs has done some really amazing things that I thought would never happen, like uh, dealing with, I've everything from an Indian sweat lodge
What is
to,
that?
like, the Native Americans where they have a sweat lodge, the Indian Native American ceremonies. Uh, at my local VA here in Richmond, they have a whole thing with that. To ketamine, to using psychedelics and psilocybin, to they're testing everything, which 10 years ago I would have said there's no way they're going to be using, magic mushrooms to try to treat PTSD. Like, even if it worked, they wouldn't do it. But that has radically changed. We recognize, I think most people recognize, the PTSD can be so traumatic for so long, and it takes sometimes a long time to show up. Like, it's there, but it's bubbling, and people are sort of dealing with it. And we saw this with Vietnam. It took, some people 20 years either to get help or the symptoms were so bad that they couldn't function in their normal life. And so there's a lot that's out there. And if you guys are interested, go look at all the other shows. We have tons of them about PTSD that you can go listen to about PTSD treatments and research. But one of the things I was really curious about is when World War II, that was 4 years of like constant fighting, 4 or 5 years for the people that were enlisted or brought in, and they were sent either to one theater or the other, or some very few served in both. Most of the time, you got assigned to a unit, and that's the unit you were in throughout the entire war. Then eventually you got home, and 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, your paperwork was signed, and you're back home, trying to figure out what you're doing. And it's very difficult to come home well, which is one of the reasons for the organization that we have. But as you're looking at all this research, have you ever looked at what happened to the Japanese side with all the trauma and because
That's a
clearly,
great question. Actually, I started talking to these Japanese people about, for example, this, you can find it on our YouTube. I'll send you a link later.
yeah, we'll
He
put it in the
was
show
a
notes. So if people are interested, they can just click on it.
Yeah, he was the son his of this guy who worked at Unit 1644, which I had no idea what it was until we talked to him about how 1644 was like a unit in Nanjing that was basically another Unit 731. So that's how wide scale it was. And his father like never really talked about it, and then his father was like, and so then after his father died, he had like a whole attic of stuff
Oh,
of
wow.
and so then he was showing me like pictures, and like it's just interesting how they like lock up the memory. And also, and then now he's like trying to find out what his father did, and so it's like super hard for him. And he said like he's now often quoted as like the Unit 1644 guy, and he's like, I barely know anything about it.
Maybe you need to do the research, or scan it from the National Archives.
But our National Archive doesn't have 1644 because it's a way smaller unit than what
Ah,
Unit 731 was. Just like this Kyushu Imperial University I was talking about earlier, it's just like a small thing.
a little
But like,
anecdote.
right, and then like when you read about it, you're like, whoa, this is messed up. And then I also met this guy whose father was in the Quantum Army, and he told me that his father often beat his mom and like and would wake up from night tears and would chain smoke and like just shut himself out. And so he was telling me that he wants to know what his father was like before his father fought this war,
Right.
because he was showing me pictures of like his father in like some jacuzzi and like in the Japanese spa, and it looked way more positive than the father that he knew.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot that happens in like war and trauma.
I'm sure that if there was the ability to do the research, but obviously now, with everyone, most of our World War II veterans are being gone. But I would imagine that the Japanese suffered significantly from PTSD as well, from not only what the enemy was doing, but from their own military, the way they were treating and what they were doing. And, people are people, and
Yes.
everyone is
There's
going to
no
have these
way there's
reactions.
no way you can kill 1,000 people with just sword and you're like the same person again.
Right. Or one person. That's the maybe if you're defending yourself, that's one thing. I think most people understand that moral injury is, seeing things that, are just shocking to your conscience, and killing somebody is a very difficult thing. And every
Definitely.
soldier has to wrestle with that. I mean, there's studies from World War II and Vietnam and all these other eras of how many rounds they would fire for every casualty that was produced. And
Right.
most people don't want to shoot somebody. They'll shoot in that direction, generally to keep the other people's their head down, but they don't want to sit there. And that's why I think snipers are so feared, because, they're very much aiming at one person. And I think that's part of it. But people don't want to do that in general. And it's a very hard thing to overcome. And I think it's a very hard thing for a Japanese or a Chinese or
For
American or
anyone, this is a
anyone.
share,
Yeah.
yeah, this is like a
The
shared thing.
universal part of it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and it's interesting. We had talked a little bit about human rights and how the Japanese had signed the Geneva Convention but didn't ratify it. So, it doesn't apply to us. But the understanding of human rights has so dramatically changed, really, since World War II. As a result of World War II, we had the famous Nuremberg trials. We had trials in Japan, but not near the same degree. I think every child has heard about the Nuremberg trials, as hey, we're going to bring justice to the bad guys. But as time has gone on, do you think that people are really understanding the cause of why we have human rights? And it's not just, oh, we want to be nice, but we don't want another Unit 731, and we don't want millions of people stacked like cordwood into trains
I
to
think
be frozen and shot and bubonic plague and every other thing.
I think it is a very complex question because I have seen that, like you said, every child knows about Nuremberg, but like Unit 731, all the scientists, had really outstanding career afterward. They were either politicians or Green Cross, which is a pharmaceutical company. Like they became like CEO and whatnot, and it's very hard to understand to like i- understand the politics of Asia without understanding the context of like World War II in Asia.
Right?
And also like nowadays the Japanese politicians uh are like basically offsprings of these war criminals. For example, the Aso mining group, his one of the son of the Aso family became the prime minister in like the 2010s of Japan, and they were using POWs to do mining in Japan. And so it's very interesting to understand that power dynamic and then wonder like, do they care about human rights?
Makes you wonder a little bit. Does make
And
you
so
wonder.
right, and the current um prime minister is talking about it used to go to Yasukuni Shrine very often where they have war criminals enshrined there. So like I'm sure a German would not, go to like a Hitler shrine.
Yeah.
But these
And that's part of the reason you don't have a Hitler shrine where nobody knows where he's buried or
right,
what happened to him. So there wouldn't be a shrine.
right.
Same thing with
And
Osama bin Laden.
yeah. And so it's just that's a very complex question. I don't think I know the answer to
Yeah, I don't think anybody does, but it's good fodder for a discussion.
Yeah.
So, Jenny, tell me, what is the name of your organization again, and how can people go and find out more about what you do, how you do it, and what kind of help you can be either provide or that you need,
Oh, well, donations always nice.
right?
At our website, pacificatrocities.org, we also have summer internships where students go and research about World War II. In fact, like 5 years ago, I had this student intern who interned with us about World War II in like Burma and China, Burma, India. And then I told him that, oh, I think I was reading something, and I told him that there's no book about the Quantum Army yet. Like, and so he spent the last 5 years researching this, and he was awarded a fellowship, and he did this book called The Rise of the Quantum Army, and you can find it on our website. And
Yay.
yeah, and like I said, we have a YouTube channel called Pacific Front Untold, and if you subscribe, it will help a lot.
Fantastic. We'll definitely put in the link in the show notes. But folks, if you want to go look at it right away, it's pacificatrocities.org. There's a ton of links. And where are you located? Somebody wants to do an internship.
We're in the San Francisco Bay Area, but our internship is now remote. So we are
perfect.
also taking in students from University of Wisconsin. It actually really helps if you're located in Maryland near College Park. So
That's where
yeah.
my alma mater.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The College Park campus has changed so much in the last like 10 years since they now have money. There are like new buildings everywhere. I'm like,
Yes.
wow, look
Every
at
time I go there now, I'm
this.
like, it wasn't like this when I was here.
But yeah. So yeah, thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. And folks, history will repeat itself. It doesn't always repeat, but it rhymes. So you will see horrible, bad things again. But if you're familiar with history, you'll be able to say, oh, this is very similar to this other thing that happened. We should probably do this because that worked then. So definitely go check it out. The Pacific War, the war in the Pacific during World War II was absolutely astonishingly horribly bad. And we don't do near enough in our professional and military education to really talk about it. Though, as we are shifting to the Pacific ever since Obama, we've tried. I think in the US, you're going to start to see more and more attention paid to the Pacific Theater, uh, simply because it's becoming such an issue. And the rise of China, and we've had other guests on recently talking about that. Go check out those episodes. But definitely, it is something, if you are a veteran and you're at all interested in history, there is a ton to mine for your own edification. There's a million books, but not nearly as many movies. But as always, those primary sources are just so incredibly important. And thanks to the Pacific Atrocities Education and Jenny Chan, you can go see it yourself. You don't have to go to the National Archives. You don't have to request the primary sources yourself. You can get on the internet and see it. So, Jenny, thank you, so much for spending all the time that you do to document all the things that happened in the Pacific, but also thank you for coming on Coming Home Well.
Thank you.
I
And see you
appreciate it
next
so
time,
much.
hopefully.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us this week on Coming Home Well with Dr. Tyler Pieron. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. Thanks again. And until all are home and all are well, this is Coming Home Well.